Listeners everywhere, welcome to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan, the weekly fix for your screen addiction and a trusted source for discussion of all things film and television. Please keep in mind that for the purposes of this podcast, Joel and Ryan are not acting as journalists, but rather fellow moving picture enthusiasts. All of their opinions should be taken as such. Also, please be warned that while Joel and Ryan may seem like petulant children, they are, in fact, adults who may occasionally use adult language. While they promise to bleep out all the worst words, it's a good bet you will still understand what they were saying. And now, with no further ado, here's Joel and Ryan.
Welcome. Hello, dear listener. Welcome to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. We are happy that you have joined us for another episode of the podcast. We're so thrilled. I am Joel.
And I'm Ryan.
And this week, this has been a bit of a week. But we're just going to kind of talk about some films, try to keep it, just try to give a little bit of not a distraction, I guess kind of a distraction. But
we're
more
always
of
a bit of a distraction. We're not exactly on topic even this week, but we do have a show inspired by the
holiday,
exactly.
This time, the unofficial beginning of summer.
Yep. So that's something. So at least we're semi tied in, but maybe we can. There's a lot going on in the world that's really hard to grapple with. Maybe we can be a distraction to that. We'll see.
And we
You'll
are
be
happy.
The judge.
Yeah, but either way, we're super thrilled that you could come by and spend some time with us. And what have you been up to, Ryan? Watching wise, what's the time of year with the movies? Have you started your summer blockbusters yet?
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely like Star Wars movies and stuff around the 5th of May and a bunch of other stuff this weekend with the long weekend, some goofy things. So yes, summer blockbusters, but I'm trying to mix other stuff in too, which I think is going pretty good. Me and Jenny the other night watched for her birthday. We watched Joker and Knives Out, which she hadn't seen either. She picked that.
Oh, wow.
That double feature. I gave her a whole bunch of options because I'm like, it's your birthday. I don't have my heart set on any of these. It's just that one.
Wow.
It's actually a good double feature because Knives Out really gets you over the Joker, which is a hard movie.
I was gonna say, please tell me that was the order you watched him in.
It was. It was.
Yeah,
it was, and it works in that order.
Sure.
So I don't know. She liked both of them a lot. I mean, they're both really, really good movies. Although I think we all enjoyed Knives Out. I don't know many people who saw that didn't enjoy themselves. Whereas with Joker, your level of enjoyment is, the spectrum is wide when we talked about the show back at the end, and then, or whether you can like it and even enjoy it at all is a legit question with that movie. So, sure. But like she said, she's like, wow, this really pulls you in right away. And I was like, it does. Good. I'm glad you're rolling with the vibe of the thing. Cause that's, if you don't, that's a long 2 hours and 10 minutes. So we did that, and a friend of the show, Bill, wrote earlier in the week, and I thought I would just bring this up since he wrote, and he didn't really write into the show. Him and I just chit chat about the stuff we talk about the show, which is really fun. Sometimes we do it on the show page, and sometimes you just message back and forth. But he asked me, he's like, he just came out and asked me, is Farscape good? Everything's telling me it's good, but I don't think I've ever even heard of it. And I was like, so I was like, oh yeah, it's so good, but it's so hard. It's fun. Farscape, you guys don't know, was a show around the turn of the century, basically late 90s.
Yeah.
Ish show.
99, yeah.
Yeah. And it had 4 seasons on Sci-Fi. It was shot in New Zealand, I believe, primarily, with Kiwi and Australian actors primarily. It was a space adventure, American astronaut hero, pretty traditional heroic guy. Although Ben Browder, the guy who starred in it, really plays this dude like, because he looks like the quarterback of the team. I mean, he is as a leading man as you're going to find, and yet he played the part in this very kind of slightly wacky and off kilter way, which was really, really appreciated because it's a wacky and off kilter show. It was primary production company behind it was Jim Henson Studios.
Oh, wow.
They were really, really hip to show that they could do more than just, hand puppets and stuff. So they created all the creatures and the makeup effects on the show, which are just off the hook good. But the show is a little filmed in the warehouses out in the, you know what I mean? Like it has that very old school. And I say old school, meaning, back 20 years ago, sort of Doctor Who sort of budget limitations. Modern Doctor Who is just as cheap and terrible as any old Doctor Who, but it's cheap and terrible in a big digital way.
It's cheap and terrible with the access to Adobe Premiere and Final Cut Pro and stuff.
There's a lot of space effects and stuff in Farscape. It's a space adventure, but it's just on the cheap side. And Doctor Who's not a bad barometer as to whether you would like it or not, although it isn't Doctor Who at all, but it has that same sense, that same zaniness, and that same sort of weird sense of humor, dark sense of humor. Like it's got all that sort of going for it. It's got a little Firefly in it as well, and it's really, really good. It's better than the sum of its parts. And if you're a sci-fi fan like Bill, I know Bill is, and you haven't seen it, then I just thought it's not related to anything we're talking about today, but it's my chance to give it the full-throated, endorsement. The show that replaced it on Sci-Fi was the Ron Moore's remake of Battlestar Galactica, which also ran 4 seasons. And those 2 shows were the best thing that have ever been on Sci-Fi Network, without doubt. They're totally different from each other, but they're so good. And it's like, I was always curious to me, why did they cancel Farscape? Although they canceled it and then they gave it its own little 2-part miniseries to wrap it up, which is so great. That finale is fantastic, and they did something similar with Galactica. They canceled it when what the creators wanted was to have a couple more seasons to go, but they canceled it with the season to go, so that at least they could get it all in there, squeeze it all in, as if you will. So, but why did Sci-Fi? I mean, I know they were expensive. Per the ratings they were getting, but why did they cancel the best things that were ever on their show, on their network ever? Because they're stupid. I mean, it's the only reason. Because why would you do it? I don't understand. Shows can't go on forever. Actors get richer and things get,
Yeah.
But both of those were canceled, both hoping really just for one more season. You know what I mean? And they were both cut short by the network, who never produced anything. It's been 20 years and they haven't produced anything even remotely as good as either of them in all this time. I mean, Galactica was, had all the power of NBC Studios behind it, so it was a little bit bigger deal for sure. But Farscape is really clever, really goofy, really characters that even though they can be very annoying, really get under your skin. You really start to care about them, and the show's surprising. It goes through lots of surprising stuff, and I'm very impressed with it. And I recommend everybody who maybe is yearning for that kind of thing, because you get the show that only had 1 season in high definition. It had 3 where it's squared off and looks kind of old and fuzzy, and you have to just sort of tolerate that. These days, when you're watching Stranger Things and Mandalorian or whatever, you were very spoiled in terms of what we get visually. Yeah. And this you have to kind of go back to another time where it was not like that. But
right.
But it's cool.
Yeah. Slight tangent, and this is something that you and I did not talk about, but I was curious if you'd seen the new trailer for the Willow series, for the Willow.
I watched it without the volume.
Okay.
Like it came across my phone, but I was sitting there at work, and so I kind of watched it. I kind of let it roll, but because I was like, well, this is interesting. But I just I'm not sure what the premise of the show is. Visuals look nice, but it's tough, man. With House of the Dragon and the Rings of Power coming out like exactly the same time, it's going to be tough for another fantasy, a lesser fantasy, frankly, to feel anywhere near momentous enough. But nevertheless, it's Disney's dime.
Yeah,
so I'm excited. And those of you who didn't like the Solo story, here's something positive that came out of it, because this really germinated there when Disney brought Ron Howard on to sort of finish up that project. He's always wanted to continue Willow, but I know a little bit about where Willow is supposed to go as a story. I don't know if they're following any of that, but it's just really different than what you think. And I think so. I don't think all those things that you remember so fondly. Willow's such a, I think of it very fondly. I was a cynical teenager in 1988 when it came out, but I really, really liked it. There wasn't a big scale fantasy like that. There've been several attempts at them, but I thought, well, here it is. This is as big a summer blockbuster as you could have created in this style at that time.
Right.
But the show doesn't look like that's what it's going to be at all. So what is it going to be?
Yeah, I don't know.
We talked about it in the Michael Mann episode, right? They made a movie of Miami Vice, but was it anything like Miami Vice? Did it provide anything that the Miami Vice fans wanted? And then it's really hard. Can you just judge it on its own then?
Yeah.
We tried to do that, but this can be something different. So I don't know. What'd you think? Did you watch it with the sound on?
Yeah. I watched it a couple times. One of the things that, that struck me about it is, the movie was so much fun and had an element of whimsy to it, like it was magical and but like mistakes were made, and because Willow wasn't a very good sorcerer, and
exactly, Mad Mardigan wasn't a very good hero.
Yeah,
the Kevin Pollak and Rick Overton were stand-up comedians, basically.
Yeah.
It was a noisy but very goofy and fun film.
Yeah. And this feels a little bit more self-serious, like it's taking itself a little bit more seriously. And I don't know if that, it feels like, I don't know. It feels like, it's Mandalorian, but with Warwick Davis. So I it's,
sure. Willow wasn't even a very good farmer.
Right. Because he wanted to be.
They're really, that sort of hits the nail on the head. These disparate little groups of people, Finn Rizal turned out to be a badass, but mostly she's like a goat and a crow.
Yeah.
It's a goofy film. It really is, but in a great way, punctuated by really great stunt-based action sequences and things like that, and fun creatures. And where's the fun is a good question, but I can just tell you that the story was going to continue in a really unexpected ways. They made sure to make that movie a closed loop of a story, but they really did have plans for what might happen later. So
sure, the movie did a good job of universe building. We understood that fantasy world. We got that. This is a world of magic and and beasts and little tiny stand-up comics and stuff.
But once you've done away with the villains and the tyrannical empire and all that stuff, where does the threat come from? It comes from within. Right. And that's a different kind of storytelling. So we'll just see. I'm very curious. I'm excited for it. I mean, my time's not so precious. I'll watch it.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'll watch it. It's like, okay, well, that was,
what was Willow on our fantasy list? 80s fantasy number 2, right? We ranked that really high.
Yeah. And I know we rated it very high.
I mean, you know, the critics ripping on it at the time were like, you know, it's just like Star Wars, but it's not as good. And that is fair. It is very structurally like that. It rips off a lot of ideas from The Hobbit, but it really dumbs them down. And that's fair too. But it's just a rollicking adventure tale with sword fighting and dragons. I mean, it's fun. I mean, I that was my take on it at the time. And the New Zealand photography and the music and everything. I mean, if you're a kid and you can't get swept away by that, because there was nothing like that on that scale at that time. There was legend and there were some really amazing fantasies, but Willow was the fantasy for everybody. That's what I loved about it.
Oh, and hopefully we'll get some Joanne Whalley. Do we know if she's in this?
Man, have you seen her lately?
No, I have not.
She still looks like $1 million.
You know what? I did see her in that Val Kilmer and that Val Kilmer documentary.
She did an interview as part of that.
Well, because she's still involved in his life because they had kids together. So she's in the documentary in places and stuff.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah, it's but she's
great. She was on The Borgias, which I guess that's all getting close to 10 years ago now, but she's fantastic on that show. So she's a very good actor still.
And boy, hard. She was so wonderful in that film. Anywho, I love her.
It's sort of you fall in love with her right away.
You fall in love with her.
Just like you're supposed to. But but it's not a super well written role, as we pointed out. It's her sort of natural charisma and their natural chemistry make up for a lot in that film.
Thanks for letting me throw that curveball at you. I wanted it just popped in my head. So of course we lost a giant of the cinema this past week, also with Ray Liotta passing. We've talked about Ray Liotta. We talked about many movies of Ray Liotta, and within talking about those movies, we always talk about how Ray Liotta is, Ray Liotta. He's solid. He's, brings it, and he's always, always, he's always just notches everything up. So to lose him and lose him only at the age of, what did we lose him at?
67.
Yeah, 67. And
I was stunned to hear that he was that old.
Yeah, because he still looks great.
I mean, that would surprise me. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. Yeah, he was born in 1954, I guess. Ray Liotta. It's hard to say. It's hard to know where to start with him. I wrote the thing up on the website, and there's a couple things. His signature things. Well, let's start with those. That when he's looking at you, those blue eyes, and his sort of dark hair and complexion and that intensity with which he approached everything was really, really, it was really, really intense. Like if that's what was called for, you totally had the right guy. And that semi out of control maniacal laugh that he has, whether he's playing a good guy or a bad guy, that laugh is one of a kind. And it comes from, it feels artificial to some degree, but because he has spent a whole career acting that way, there's a great scene in I had it in my head and then I just forgot it. It's a film with James Gandolfini and Brad Pitt's in it. It's just a crime drama, like a lot of the things that he's in. But he plays this guy, Marky. I remember that. His character's name's Marky. He was this low-life gangster who won one bold, drunken, brave moment in his past, put on a ski mask and robbed his fellow mobsters' poker game, which had tons of money there. And they're all, when they find that guy, they're going to kill him. And then some years later, they're all sitting around drinking and laughing, and he admits that he did it. And everybody's just laughing like it's funny, and we're all okay. But then there's this, the next day, it was like, okay, now that was pretty funny, but that's it. Now, the next time something like this happens, you're dead. You know that, right? And he's like, yeah, I get it. I'm never going to do that again. Well, somebody else does it by coincidence, and this is how the story plays out. It's a pretty decent, it's a dark movie, but it's a pretty decent movie.
Killing Them Softly is that
Thank you,
one.
Killing Them Softly. Yeah, a lot of people hate it, so I hate to say it's great, but it does show the sort of incompetence of this sort of crime world. Gandolfini plays a hitman who shows up to take care of somebody and plays video games, watches TV, he didn't know this until he showed up to do this job, but he somewhere on his last job just killed the last person he's capable of killing. And so he procrastinates, and he thinks eventually he'll work his way up to it, but he never does. He just goes home. So the film is an exercise in not paying off these sort of crime drama cinematic cliches that we're used to. There's surprise sudden deaths in it, and it just everything goes haywire and stuff. But I am an admirer of that movie, partly because Ray is fantastic in it. That scene, because it's in two parts. It's him telling the story of him doing the thing, and then him telling the story of confessing which are all shown in flashback and stuff. And so it's just him taking the stage for this whole extended sequence. It's just awesome.
Wow.
And then later it's Gandolfini's movie, and later it's Brad Pitt's movie. And you don't really have anybody to glom onto in it, but good one. And a great late period performance by him. My favorite movie of his, and it's just great because after Something Wild, where he really he'd been on a soap opera and he'd done a bunch of stuff out east, and then when he moved west, the way he tells it, he had started from scratch basically as an actor. He had to audition, he had to go back, take classes, he had tried to get himself better, all that, until Something Wild kind of muscled his way into the audition process for that. Because one of his teachers said, "Are you up for this?" Well, he'd never heard of it, so he got whoever his people were at the time to at least get him a reading, which changed that movie. I mean, I suppose there's other people who could have done that role, but it's hard to imagine a different person in that part like that. Goodfellas and some of these roles that he's had that are iconic. The one to me where it's like that the whole turn of the movie. It's not the whole movie, but the whole turn of the movie is because of him, and it's stunning to see. But he knew, I'm going to play the same asshole. I'm going to be choking people to death for the rest of my career unless I do something different right away. So he held out for this movie that they didn't really want him, with Tom Hulse, called Dominic and Eugene. It's by far my favorite Ray Liotta performance. It's a really motivated actor. They're these brothers. The film is this weird, quiet slice of life drama. It's not at all what you would think. He's still that intense, I'm going to go kick your ass because you were mean to my brother type of guy. Like, he's still Ray Liotta in it. He's not miscast in it or anything, but he's a good guy that we're all on his side. And if that's not an easy movie to catch, but Dominic and Eugene, I can't recommend that high enough. Obviously Goodfellas is iconic. I think he's fun. And, all those movies where there's all these moments in his career where they're walking along doing something, and then he stops and starts telling you how it is. There's a ton of moments like this in his career.
Yeah, you're absolutely
right. Article 99 and Operation Dumbo Drop. There's just a whole bunch of them. And I love those moments. He's so great in those moments. People love him in Field of Dreams. I just say it, but if we're going to eulogize You Honestly Mate, playing Shoeless Joe Jackson the way he does is the equivalent of playing Churchill with a French accent. I still can't. It's not right. Mm-hmm. His natural charisma comes across, which it has to, but I just like, do you know anything about the man? You know, he was just alive not that long ago. It's not like, you know, you're not playing somebody from the Roman Empire or something. So that was kind of annoying to me, because that's, well, most people's, what they know of that person in real life is from that movie.
Right.
So that sort of annoys me, but he's still fun in it. It's, you know, the maniacal laugh, right? When he says the thing about, what's his face wanted to come along, but we all thought he was a jerk. So we didn't tell him where it was or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I
don't know. You know, he's great. I mean, he's great. Yeah. He did it. I'm sad he's gone, but I don't feel too bad for him because he did it. Look what's there. It's 120 plus screen performances. And I mean, that's the dream that every actor has, to leave a legacy like that behind.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
So all told, with his mountains and mountains of great material, but he stuck with it, and he made his presence felt in every project he was a part of. And
when you cast Ray Liotta in something, you're going to get a version of Ray Liotta, pretty much, and that's not a bad thing. Because what he brings to a role, what he brings to a story, it's that natural. Even in his most cuddliest roles, there's a menacing quality to him.
There's a little bit. There's a little bit. I mean, there is a little bit. There are a few places where that doesn't happen. Surprisingly, in Blow,
right?
He's really great guy in that, like a really sort of sad, great guy, and there's no sense that this guy's responsible for any of the other chaos that we're feeling going on in the rest of that film. Mm-hmm. That's a really good performance that I think a lot of people don't think about. But yeah, I mean, yes, there's danger in him, and that's exciting.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's,
it's exciting. Well, good guy or bad guy, or if put best to best use, he was a protagonist who had a healthy dose of bad guy in him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Like in Narc, like in Goodfellas, those sorts of roles, like in Copland. We'll miss him. So that's our shout out to
you. Ray Liotta. Great body of work. Big shock. I mean, it is. It's just a big surprise that we lost him, and hopefully, it's undetermined how he died yet, as far as I know. But hopefully,
people are speculating, but it doesn't sound like it's any huge thing. It sounds like it's a thing. Hopefully 67 is pretty young, actually, but it is old enough to die of heart disease and various things that kill you when you're older. And so we'll see. But he was in the middle of working. He was still chugging along,
Yeah. I was looking at it. He has 4 projects that were either in production or in post production. So
what is it? Is it Heartbreakers? Is that the movie with that he's in? He's fantastic in that too.
Yeah, I was just looking at that one.
So he was really cool, and by all accounts, he was. Because he was not a dangerous guy in real life. He was a kind of a pro's pro, and he was a guy who would, on set, if there were problems, who would step up. He was a guy who would talk to other actors about like not being late and stuff, and just be the dude who was. Joel, you come across these people all the time. You to some degree, you are this person, but that whole the bravery to, hey, we're going to work this out, we're going to talk about this,
I don't know that. Yeah, obviously I didn't know the man, but he comes across as a guy who this is his profession. He is a craftsman, takes the job of performing seriously enough, and understands that within the art you still have to collaborate. You still have to be it's still a workplace. By all accounts, he was that kind of guy. He was a pro's pro.
It makes sense. You don't tend to go on forever in that way by being a big jerk.
Right.
It really, that's not to say that they, it's for ages, they don't exile you necessarily for that, for bad behavior, but the amount of directors who used him in multiple things and, that sort of thing, it's like you could just kind of tell.
Yeah,
they liked having him around.
Yeah,
you couldn't put him in just anything, but even though he says to him it's just make believe. He's not a method actor. He doesn't stay in character between takes or anything like that. But he said that he does that because he feels like that. He feels like if you bring too much of yourself to something, you limit yourself. Or at least speaking for himself, he felt that way. Mm-hmm. And that's an easy going acting philosophy to be around on a long project. I'll just say.
Right.
That's nice. It's nice to play that way. Maybe not for everybody, but I think that's cool.
So Ray Liotta, you will be missed. Thank you for all the amazing body of work.
Yeah.
So today we have a chunk of movies. It is, as we are recording this, just in case you were listening to this week's down the line, we are recording this on the Memorial Day weekend. And so we thought it would only be appropriate to talk about Memorial Day is a day to remember and honor those who have fallen and died in service to this country. But of course, there's also the consequences of serving for this country can result in post-traumatic stress disorder and depression and all sorts of things that, for those who return home alive, you can return home, but you can return home forever changed. And we thought that it would be nice to highlight some films that talk about this, that talk about the idea of coming home from war and trying to return back to the home front.
We want to do a show about soldiers for sure. But we want to do a different kind of set of movies. And there's a good handful of these, but there aren't as many as I thought as I worked through all the ones that I was super familiar with. There's big gaps in time where we don't really deal with it, probably because we don't, for a long time there, we didn't have a lot of wars. You know what I mean?
Right.
We'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the show, but yeah, we understand the distinction between Memorial Day, where it really is about the fallen warriors who paid the ultimate price fighting for our country and what that means. And I believe that's touched on, even though these films are, and I think films are sort of necessarily about the survivors of that. I don't think you can tell a story about you can certainly show sacrifice, and we've seen a lot of that in film, but that's showing the war. These movies are about what happens to people after the war. They're almost entirely about that. And so it's more of a Veterans Day themed show, but we do understand the distinction. Veterans is the people who fought and are still around and deserve your respect while they're here. Memorial Day is for the people who fell and to be remembered. We're going to do a little bit of both, and we hope that you we hope that everybody sort of is cool with that, doing it that way. Because I do think these films memorialize people. You know, I really do think that's a big part of each of them, one way or another. And it's an interesting group, but they're not all heavy dramas. There's thrillers and a couple of murder mysteries here, and they're, you know, but they really are about being a soldier and the after effects of that. To every single one, I think pretty much is ultimately about that, because that's who's left to memorialize, really. All of us, truly, but more than anyone, the people who lived alongside the fallen, who sort of carry that spirit with them later in life, and the cost that they pay and continue to pay for that. So that's the list. We got 10 movies. We're going to go through them in chronological order. And
first up, I mean, obviously, also, you know, the Vietnam War was that was the first, you know, that our soldiers who returned home from Vietnam weren't viewed as the conquering heroes that their parents were when they returned home from World War II. And so we had a lot of after
World
Vietnam.
War II was won in a big bright
and it was
flash of light.
Aha, we win.
And Vietnam ended because American people and the just lost their taste for being able to tolerate it anymore. So it was a very different thing, and certainly their post-traumatic stress and all that was certainly I think suffered by anyone who'd been through war, specifically combat. You know, they called it shell shock back in the day. There's a great George Carlin routine. It says, should probably still call it shell shock. That sounds awful. You know, some of the way we water down our language, even if we make it more descriptive and more appropriate and cast a wider net with it. It's true that we do tend to, there's sometimes that first idea is simple and harsh and shell shock. Yeah. That sounds like something that's bad that you need to get help for, you know?
Right. And one of the first movies to deal with that is a movie from 1977 with Henry Winkler and Sally Field, early Sally Field film called Heroes.
There's a couple of movies here that go together. Coming Home by Hal Ashby, which was nominated for Oscars and was very, very acclaimed. Starred some super heavy hitter actors at the time. But I was surprised. I thought Heroes came after it. Came the year before, which is amazing. It really was, I don't want to say it was the first movie to deal with Vietnam, but it was really the first movie to really deal with it. It was not a subject
to deal with the veterans, to deal with what it was like trying to come home.
I mean, the only other one that there was probably Green Berets, which was an absurd propaganda film that John Wayne did, which admittedly has that pretty cool theme song, but is it's like we're fighting for America. It's like to just sort of miss the whole point of Vietnam. You watch it now and it is absurdly wrong-headed. You know, it's tonally how it treats that war, and it was made right as the war was going on. So that's just bonkers. But yeah, dealing with veteran after effects. Heroes was the first one, which is kind of amazing because I got a real soft spot in my heart for Heroes. Henry Winkler, definitely. Sally Field in 1977. Second movie in 77 where Sally Field plays a runaway bride. Smokey and the Bandit, obviously.
Right.
Winkler's outstanding in it. Wow, he's good in this movie. He plays this really, well, it's a Robin Williams-esque performance where he's just sort of off the hook, positive and driven, and he never shuts up, and he's always got an agenda, and he's got a plan for the future, and boom, 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 boom. And the amount of energy scene to scene that he had to expound to play this guy, his escape from the mental hospital that he's in at the beginning of the movie is a delightful, almost like it's a mad world sort of foot chase that's just full of craziness and weirdness. And it's a road movie. He's going from New York, where he's been hospitalized, rightly so, as we find out as the movie goes on. He going all the way to California. His goal is to start a worm farm with his fellow soldiers, and that's going to be their legacy and their way forward in this brave new world. And he's an absurdly positive guy, but he's obviously repressing a lot of horror as well. And the cool thing about the movie is that we don't really experience much of that until we do. So it really has the feel of a buddy comedy road trip film. You know, Sally Field and him, he bumps into her somehow and they travel together for a while and then they just sort of stay together. Somewhere, I think it's in, I don't know where, somewhere halfway through America, he hooks up with one of his buddies from his platoon, played by Harrison Ford, who's this guy who he built this race car. And he's and once he sees his craziest guy in the platoon show up, he's like, this is all going to work. You're going to drive the car, not me. And there's these race sequences, which if you like, it's like I think the car is I want to say it's a Camaro, and it's dirt oval racing, which is a really exciting, messy, chaotic thing to watch, and the film really captures that really, really great. And Ford too is playing a comedic character. To be fair, he's got this weird hat that he wears, but there's something off about him too. It's hard to explain, but those relationships, that section of the film is really, really delightful. Just because there's a third person who comes into the movie all of a sudden, and it shakes things up a little bit. Mm-hmm. And like I said, the racing, it just becomes a racing movie for a while. It does have that sort of randomness to it.
Right.
Field's character really comes to care for him, and it seems like it's one of those films where it's like this guy's got pretty modest dreams, and everybody seems to want to dash them for one reason or another. And both of these films feature women who were left out of this particular conflict, who basically through kindness and empathy help people to confront difficult things and help them heal to some degree. Coming Home's a little more complicated because she does do that for somebody, but she's who they grow very close. Jane Fonda in Coming Home. Jane Fonda, we talked about her when we were talking about 9 to 5 a couple of weeks back. 9 to 5 exists because Jane Fonda wanted to tell a story with some integrity. It didn't matter that it was a comedy or whatever, but she wanted to tell a story about these working class women in in all the office towers in America. It was her vision, even though she didn't really do much of it. And as a producer, she was kind of stood back and let it happen. Mm-hmm. Showed up on set and was an actor, wasn't telling everybody what to do kind of thing. Same here. She wanted to tell a story kind of all of it. She wanted to tell a story of these guys who were injured, who came back. It's a VA hospital is where the main action of the story takes place, where everybody's, has been disabled. Some people rather severely, but everybody's sort of rehabbing and finding a way to work with that. There's a big wheelchair chase in the middle of it, which is a fun, weird, crazy scene. And, but she's married to a guy who's just about to go off to war, played by Bruce Dern. And when he leaves, she's kind of like, she's living with him on the base, and they let her stay there because her husband's fighting in the war, of course, but she's left with no purpose, and she gravitates to this VA hospital out of kindness and stuff. And there's another woman, I can't remember who plays it's because she's important. Robert Carradine plays her brother. That's how we'll figure out who these characters.
Yeah, Penelope Milford. Penelope Milford as Vi.
Meryl Streep auditioned for that role, and they really wanted her, but she'd agreed to do a play. But Penelope's really, really good in it. The two women sort of looking out for each other. It's kind of neat. It's a weird movie. Hal Ashby. It's hard to explain what a Hal Ashby film is. You know, Harold and Maude. If you haven't seen one, there's a randomness to it. You know, the film Coming Home was shot by Herman Wexler, who shoots this in this very gauzy sort of style, so the movie feels older than it even is. But there's this random truth to it. You know, the film starts out with this scene where these actual Vietnam vets are playing billiards and talking about, they're having a philosophical debate about being able or not being able to admit that some of the things you might have done in Vietnam were bad.
Right.
And that maybe the whole thing was bad. And it's improv by these actual veterans. It's really, I mean, there's nothing quite like it in film. And John Voight is there, and he was supposed to interact with them, but he just they took care of it. Yeah. And out of respect, he's like, I'm going to kind of not actor my way into this. This is happening on its own. And so his presence is felt in the scene, but his sort of character opinion about this stuff, when these guys are actually talking about this, who know what they're talking about, it's kind of neat. It's my favorite John Voight performance probably of all time.
Sure. Yeah.
John's obviously, he's a big time actor, and he's been really, really memorable in tons of things. And this guy too, it kind of goes through this thing where it's a bit of a cheat. When we meet him, he's pissed at everything. He's yelling at everybody. He's breaking stuff. He's a total jerk. And she sort of helps him along, Fonda's character, and eventually they have an affair, and that affair causes a lot of pain, as you can imagine, by the end of the film. But it's a really good movie. I reacquainted myself with it today. I'd seen it a long time ago, but I needed to watch it again. You know what I mean? Because if you'd asked me this morning, I'd have said, "Oh, I actually like Heroes better." You know, it's a little subtler. Right. It doesn't have all the sort of preachiness. The whole thing's not about war. War's there, living inside this guy, and that's the thing. But I liked that about it. But after this, I'm kind of like, no, it is sort of the A-list crew that really got this type of story right. When you watch something like Deer Hunter that came out in the same year as 78, won the Oscar for Best Picture in the same year, although all the acting awards went to the people in Coming Home, which is interesting. Deer Hunter's written by people who didn't go to war, directed by people who didn't go to the war. You know what I mean? Even if they don't have big roles, Coming Home is populated by Vietnam veterans. They're everywhere in the film at all times. It makes a huge difference. And that film that's a tough one. It's lots of neat trivia about it. You know, Bruce Dern, there's a confrontation scene with our three people at the end, and Dern, for one of the takes, just started ripping on them personally. They've all known each other. They're all studio actors, I believe.
Yeah,
I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that's right. So when we're talking about method acting, here's three big ones, basically, at least especially at that time. And so he kind of knew them and what their strengths and weaknesses were. He knew bad things that they'd done in their lives, and he just, one whole take was just him yelling at them. And then when they did the next take, you know, that he went back to the script or whatever. Bruce Dern's an interesting cat. That's all I can say. And
sure.
I don't know. It's hard. I'm not, Joel, you've seen it. I'm not describing it very well, or am I? It's hard because you can't just, here's the plot, you know?
Yeah. I mean, you know, it really, the reason why Coming Home resonates, it still resonates. It's why it won, like you said, it won the acting awards and stuff. It's because it really handles the the trauma or the, you know, that what now, what am I supposed to do now? I'm not, you know, element, very honestly, very, and with a good deal of respect. I mean, it
never loses it touch of the tender moments, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
Which is amazing for a film like that. And Fonda's character is let be. She doesn't have an agenda. Her first day when she shows up to the hospital, she looks like one of the astronaut wives from Apollo 13. Like she's got this teal, like she's just, and her hair is all kind of beehived and stuff. And I mean, she just look like you don't belong anywhere here in this random messy place. You're in your like pristine little 60s off the rack outfit. But she doesn't play some naive idiot who has to be taught a lesson about any of this either. She's already has it within her to care and just does that naturally, and everything sort of takes its course. The bravery of doing that, you know, we talked about the Three Monkeys a couple weeks back. The bravery to let humanity happen on screen and to trust that it will happen without you laying out a precise agenda like that is truly a lost art in cinema. And Ashby, he's a guy we don't talk about very much. Maybe we'll do a whole show on him. I have all of his movies here, it turns out. I'm not missing a single one. He's special because that's how he tells stories. And everybody was along for the ride and a great day. And if anything, when Dern shows up, you know, he kind of starts the movie, he shows up in the middle in a pretty amazing scene, and then he really takes charge at the end because he's got tons of stuff going on with him. His sort of formalism is a harsh break in this sort of everything's happening. And a shout out to Robert Carradine. Boy, is he heartbreakingly good in this. I don't think I've seen him any better in anything. And I like him in this era. His sort of, you know, it's sort of Revenge of the Nerds sort of ruined him.
Right.
Well, it did. Right. I don't mean to be mean about it.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Because
it didn't ruin Anthony Edwards, but it ruined Robert Carradine forever because he was a guy who could do the unexpected and could do some kind of amazing things. And he's kind of just a joke now, and that's a shame.
Right.
So.
You know, yeah, because like we talked about weeks ago with Big Red 1, you know, he's spectacular in that. But yet you know, watching it as someone our age, you're like, oh, hey, that's our character from Revenge of the Nerds. You know, we're going to talk about The Park Is Mine.
That's a little different sort of switch, but somewhat similar sorts of things going on. Right.
The Park Is Mine. To me, The Park Is Mine is sort of like, I mean, it has that because, you know, we're not going to talk about like the original First Blood, which deals with with coming home from Vietnam, but in a much more violent, different way.
We talk about First Blood a lot, so we'll probably talk about it again. But it's not really on this list, even though we said before. I mean, what is First Blood? It's 1982. So it's not it is an 80s movie, obviously, but it isn't an 80s movie. The 80s started when Michael Jackson's Thriller came out. That's what I always say, which was the end of 82. And after that, the 70s were really gone. There were a couple, 3 years there where we were, you know, disco was gone, but you were still sort of living in that organic place. And that's when First Blood came out. And First Blood doesn't end with it does end with a big giant action sequence and a huge shoot 'em up, but it also ends with a 2-page
monologue,
mental breakdown that our hero goes through. And so in that way it is very much a post-war film. I mean, it is
Homefront, but it's one of its Homefront films. The Park Is Mine is kind of like, well, we're going to do a TV movie version of First Blood.
basically.
Where Tommy Lee Jones is going to take over Central Park.
To be fair, the movie was made for HBO. It doesn't have commercials. It was shot on film, shot in widescreen. If you watch it today, it doesn't feel like a TV movie. It was not an ABC movie of the week where there's a stinger at the end of every 6 minutes so you can go to commercial.
Yeah. Right.
Not that kind of thing at all. So I just want to make sure people know that. In fact, it's the first piece of original content that HBO produced. So it's
get out.
Despite its relative, its mediocre quality rating as a film, it puts it as a significant place in history. And it was a controversial enough film that it had one home video release. It was never put out on DVD. You can catch it now, but it was one of these things where, people remembered watching it on HBO, but where is it? What is it? It's gone. Only just recently to come back. I didn't see it at the time, and back in '85 when it was new. So I just saw this again about 3 years ago for the first time, and I knew about its reputation, but it's interesting. It's Tommy Lee Jones plays a veteran who snaps and takes over Central Park on his own. He's a former I believe he's a former Green Beret who can't. He's one of these guys who can't walk into a room without a tactical plan about it. And because he's a New Yorker, he has thought just instinctively how he would hold down Central Park with a very small group of people. Turns out one in this case. And that's a pretty far-fetched idea. But the thing that's cool about the movie is Helen Shaver plays a reporter who's like super not into, who really obviously has a sort of different view of the war than he does. Yaphet Kotto plays the cop and Yaphet's great in this film. He's maybe the best thing about the film. He plays a cop who just really thinks this shouldn't be a shooting match. Like he's the smart, wise person who just wants to end this the smartest way possible. And at every step has to hold off the higher ups from doing the batshit insane thing that will definitely lead to casualties. That's fun to watch. It is like a sort of hostage negotiation, it's a mean place.
Mm-hmm.
The world's a mean place. The city's a mean, grumpy place. And this dude just suffers a lot of frustration and injustice and just general rudeness. And that's what makes him snap. And the world continues to be an exploitive, sort of ugly place, even once the hostage situation starts happening. And that part rings really true. There's things about it where I couldn't believe what I was seeing. They bring in 3/4 of the way through, they bring in these assassin characters to take him out. Right. And they're both Southeast Asian people, which has insane racial overtones that the movie doesn't need at that point. But that's the kind of movie we're talking about. And it's like they don't hide the Canadian license plates, they don't hide the maple leaf flags hanging in the background. It really is sort of not New York,
Right.
They've got some stock footage of Manhattan so that that's where it takes place, but it's super Toronto. If you know any, maybe a lot of Americans don't, and so the illusion was semi-maintained. I don't know, but I know Toronto a little, and it's like, here's all the most famous Toronto landmarks you could have put in this movie. I mean,
there is Toronto, eh? Yep.
So it's a goofy film, but
right.
It's hard to dismiss entirely. Tommy Lee Jones, obviously. Tommy Lee Jones, I know he's kind of a star. I mean, he kicked around in all these 70s and 80s movies forever, but was he really? I mean, he wasn't really. Mm-hmm. That's a guy who sort of made the scene in the late 80s. He's about to finally be a guy where they put him in all the A-list movies. They let him carry films on his own, that sort of thing. He'd starred in stuff before, but he's been in a lot of high-profile stuff. So I don't mean to dismiss him, but his whole career up till that point. But he just was a dude who was like, oh, that dude. And he was doing this movie and Nate and Hayes and Eyes of Laura Mars, weird stuff.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he had done a TV movie of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof.
He's good in that.
Yeah, and he was that. And obviously he had done Coal Miner's Daughter.
Right.
But you're right.
Most famously Coal Miner's Daughter.
But you're right. I mean, you look at he's just kind of kicking around, doing projects, doing some films, and
He's a dude who was almost in his 50s when he became a sort of A-list star.
Yeah,
even though he'd been a very, very busy actor up until that point.
Yeah, constantly working. But then you get, he was Paul in Billy Joel's Piano Man music video short in '85, the real estate novelist. But he did Lonesome Dove, and then that led to things like JFK and The Fugitive, and so then that's when things really.
And I feel like he's been like a top flight guy ever since. So we got another Tommy Lee Jones movie coming up. Much subtler and thoughtful film than this one.
But I will say, like we don't normally talk about review except for the episode where we reviewed really looked at quote unquote underrated films, but a reviewer here just titles it, "If Tommy Lee says the park is his, well then the park is his." And I'm like, that's a great title for a review.
Well, even the name of the title feels exploitative. The park is mine. That's the not
park is mine. Yeah.
That's straight to the point, but that's not a poetic title, you know what I mean? Like it's such a silly movie, but there's, I don't know, you've seen it. See, Joel, you know what I'm talking about. I think you had to have seen it to kind of know what I'm getting at. There's something more to it.
Right. I mean, because the whole
there's something more to it. There's a harsh world, and this situation that happens, partly because he's crazy and angry, but mostly because, like the reviewer says, he is able to do this. That's why he does. That's a big reason why he does it.
And he does that. The whole purpose is to raise awareness for veterans who have come back from the war, and that I remember. And this has been many years since I've seen this, but I do remember that overriding, and maybe that's a credit to Tommy Lee Jones, is he does. Everything that he does is in service to, in that character's mind, is in service to trying to bring awareness. People pay attention, and wake up. Wake up.
So, and that drives the thing, and that makes it more than just a silly, low budget, made in Canada, TV movie. It's more than that, even though it's also that. It's both. Yeah.
So let's jump ahead a little bit into 87. Well, I guess only a couple of years. Park is Mine was 85, and 87, another Vietnam film. This was Francis Ford Coppola's coming home from Vietnam film, and that's Gardens of Stone.
I've barely seen Gardens of Stone. I feel like I think I've seen it because I know what it's about, so I must have caught it at some point, but this wasn't a big hit. It's kind of weird. It was James Caan's return to acting after 6 years. He did Kiss Me Goodbye with Jeff Bridges, and he hated doing that movie so much he just quit acting he thought maybe forever. So Coppola got him to come back from this. He plays a guy who comes home from the war, comes home from Vietnam in this case, and really, really wants to be assigned to be is he a master sergeant? I can't remember. I think so.
So it's just sergeant.
It says sergeant. Well, he wants to be a training officer for the people who are going to the war, but his feelings about the war are realist and harsh, and they don't really want him spreading the word about that in that context. So they give him his assignment to be a trainer. But they assign him to where they train the honor guard, what he calls in the movie, I believe, toy soldiers, basically. And he feels like he's being exiled there, but whatever. This is what he had. The Army's what he has, so he goes along with it. And by luck, a war buddy of his son is just joined the military and is there, played by D.B. Sweeney. Yes.
Yes.
DB Sweeney, by the way, which no offense to Ray after you've left us, but if you want to see the definitive shoeless Joe Jackson on screen, it's played by DB Sweeney in 8 Men Out. Check that out. That's a great baseball film. Okay. And he gets it. He nails it. He really does. And he's sort of an underrated actor, I think. Anyway, yeah, DB Sweeney. So, hey, at least he can prepare one kid. He can save one life. That's how he views it. If he's going to join the military, if he's going to go to war, I'm going to prepare him for it. And of course, what prepares you for Vietnam? I mean, if that's a harsh lesson that the movie's not exactly trying to prove, but it's certainly something that we can all imagine. But the story of this guy, he's certainly haunted by his Vietnam experience, but he's not Henry Winkler, who's trying to start a worm farm and just avoid dealing with it. And he's not John Voight's character, who's very much based on Ray Kovacs, who was famously played by Tom Cruise in Born on the 4th of July. He's not going to go around spreading the word about how evil Vietnam is in the high schools and in the press. That's not his game at all. He just wants to better prepare people, and he's given this sort of opportunity to do that and to atone for the loss of this guy by taking his son under his wing. And it's an interesting movie that way. It's Coppola directs it really simply and modestly, but I admit I can't remember the nuances of it, and this was one that I don't have here, so I was not able to refamiliarize myself with it. But I do remember Good. I do remember Sweeney and his. It's Catherine, who plays his fiance in it. She's a great actor from
Mary Stuart Masterson.
Mary Stuart Masterson. Thank you.
Yeah.
She's great in it. She's Mary Stuart Masterson. So good.
Yep.
Man, was she a good actor. And and still is probably. I don't know. I don't see her very often, but
yeah, I just clicked on it to say, yeah, she's another one that just is working all the time.
I believe it. She should
episode here, episode there, doing tons of different stuff. So.
Really, really good, and she's great in that film. And I believe her parents in that movie, they're barely in it, but they're played by her real life parents too, which is an interesting choice. There's a bunch of behind the scenes stuff, drama that went on with that film. Elias Koteas is in it. He's fantastic in it. This movie and Coppola's next movie, Tucker, A Man in His Dream, Elias Koteas is fantastic in both of them. But so I'll just leave it there. If we were in a normal show or we were in a Coppola show, there'd be a lot more to talk about this film. But
yeah,
that's the theme, and it's a little different. I mean, that's a little different even than the rest of these, where, you know what I mean? It's right. There's a different motivation behind it that makes it its own unique thing. And Gardens of Stone, I mean, there's a poetic title for you.
Right.
It has that bit of poetry at its heart too. So I like that about it.
So after, so then we,
even though I couldn't speak, I still wanted to get it in there because I know that it's good. Like I remember, it sticks with me that it's good, even though it is in sort of that vague, hazy, cloudy way.
Right.
Sorry, Joey, go ahead.
No, so I was just going to say, so we had, like you said, we had a period of time where, you could still make Vietnam War films because the U.S. wasn't really involved in any other war conflicts. And then Desert Storm comes, the first Iraq War.
Right. And the return of this themed sort of entertainment in its wake came roaring back. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and one of the big ones to come out of that was Courage Under Fire, starring Denzel Washington and Meg Ryan.
Desert Storm.
Yeah, Desert Storm. And a time when women were in combat now.
Denzel plays a tank commander who has been assigned at the Department of Defense to vet the medals, the high medals that are coming out, that are being awarded posthumously in particular. So that's an interesting gig to have. It's an investigative job, but it requires quite a bit of sensitivity on his part, as you can imagine. And the big ringer of a case that he's been given is this woman played by Meg Ryan in the film, in flashback primarily, who was killed. I can't remember the award that she's up for. Is it the Medal of Honor? I don't think it is.
Well, yeah, she's up for the Medal of Honor. Yeah,
she is. Okay, so he's got to. That's a big deal. That's a really big deal. So he's got to decide if that's justified or not. So he has to investigate what happens to her, and in the investigation, he finds out way more than what he was expecting. It's an interesting movie. I mean, Denzel, on one hand, is a guy who I won't spoil really what his Desert Storm experience was, but he suffered some stuff and is still really, really struggling with that. He's sort of using this as an escape to get away from his family and to travel around and to not, because they can tell something is up with him. He could be in trouble. He's drinking a lot. His boss has put him on this case as a way to help him. Like, this is supposed to help him. But he's teetering a little bit. And the details that come out about this incident, and the incident's fully explained to us in this flashbacks, but told by all these firsthand accounts. Lots of really good actors who were part of the platoon that act that out. Famously, I guess, Diamond Phillips, probably the flashiest of them in the film. He's great in it because he's really sort of gone over the edge, and a fantastic sort of introduction to the world turn by Matt Damon, by a shriveled up skeletal Matt Damon.
Yeah.
We're too easy to reward people for doing that to themselves, or for getting fat for roles and stuff. We've handed out awards and made careers on that. I think we need to stop doing that. I mean, at all times people are getting a little bit better at how they do that, but I feel like when you see him in it, it can't be healthy what he did to himself and look the way he does in this film. It's still Matt Damon, and he still has his little. It's still, the guy has got a sense of humor and is this sort of warm dude, but you could just tell he's a changed guy because of the war,
right?
And that made an impression on a lot of people. They thought, "Wow, if he's willing to go that far, then he can be in my movie," and whatever, blah blah. So he built a career on that, but. The film is sensational. The incident in Desert Storm that happened is a sensational incident of which there's really no precedent for in real life. So the whole thing has this. It's directed by Edward Zick. It has this, even though it deals with all this stuff, which is great to do, it has a very slick Hollywood entertainment feel to it all, which after the fact makes it kind of. I don't know what to do with it. Especially as time goes on. Desert Storm's such a weird. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end if I don't completely run out of time stammering and stuttering about these movies. But Desert Storm's an interesting one. Let's just say.
Yeah.
There is a movie about the invasion of Grenada called Heartbreak Ridge.
Right. Yeah.
Which is Grenada. I mean, no offense to the soldiers who fought in Grenada, but it's just, we didn't have a lot of stuff, and Desert Storm was a big deal. But of course, Desert Storm wasn't a big deal relative to what we were still capable of.
Right.
Desert Storm, we'll talk about it, but it's interesting. Let's just say that. And this film is interesting as a result. It really tries to bring a level of Vietnam conspiracy and complexity that wasn't part of that.
Sure.
And that's weird. And it makes it stand out a little like a sore thumb, but it's an entertaining movie, right? Denzel and Meg Ryan. I mean, it
was absolutely worthy of the Blockbuster Entertainment Award that Diamond Phillips won.
Did he win the Blockbuster Entertainment Award?
He did indeed.
I mean, I'm not a huge Lou Diamond Phillips fan in particular, but man, he brings it in this film.
Yeah, he does.
He telegraphs too much, but it's okay. I think that he does that to some degree because our hero, and we all know he's wrong as rain when we first meet him, and it's just a matter of getting it out of him. And when it comes out, holy Moses! So it again, in a Hollywood thriller murder mystery, if you will, it's a great performance. In a film that we're dealing with the subtleties and trickiness of postpartum distress and issues of friendly fire and women in the military. Maybe it could have been a little more of a thoughtful piece, but at that time, the fact that they were dealing with any of that is still kind of impressive,
right?
And it is an entertaining film. It pulls you along, definitely, without doubt. So
let's move on to In the Valley of Allah. Another our second Tommy Lee Jones film, and this is post-war Homefront in a sort of the dude is missing after he comes home from his tour in Iraq, and Tommy
Lee Jones plays a former military police officer whose son has gone AWOL, and he travels to where he's stationed, with a Homefront place he's stationed, to investigate. And I think we have to spoil at least the first big reveal of the film, which is that he's found in pieces spread out amongst this sort of highway, this empty lot along this highway. And it has to be foul play because he's just been chopped into pieces, which is a horrific thing. Tommy Lee Jones teams up with the outcast cop in town, played by Charlize Theron, to investigate and didn't find out anything good.
Right.
This film was written and directed by Paul Haggis, who was fresh off of Crash, which won a bunch of Oscars. And this is Paul Haggis' best movie by a country mile. It's so incredibly human and harsh. And Tommy is so amazingly good at it. And Charlize is good in it. And what the kids of that generation were capable of handling in these anti-terrorism wars that they went to. I don't remember which war, if it's Afghanistan or Iraq, but to America, those were the same war. They weren't. But really, to us, they were the same, which is why it's sometimes hard to keep track of in the movies. This isn't a film where we experience any of the war at all. We hear some recordings and we get a phone call from the war, but this really is the kind of ultimate Homefront film, and it really does have the driving energy of a murder mystery where the person investigating loves the victim, and that's just a powerful, harsh thing to experience. Susan Sarandon plays the mother. It's populated with all kinds of great actors. I want to say Jason Patric's in this. I think he's really good in it too.
Yep, Jason Patric.
I think he's really, really good in it too. So beyond that, it's hard. I can't want to get into the details of it, but it's hard to imagine a film dealing with regret and the harsh realities of what a thing this is. Susan Sarandon, and this doesn't really spoil anything, so this is okay, but she's on the phone when he's giving her the news, and she just blames him. He couldn't be the son you wanted unless he joined the military. And it's not what it was.
Yeah.
When you did it and you did this, you killed him. I mean, she just goes off on him, and she's weeping and despondent. Susan Sarandon, obviously, she's A++. So, but she's not in the movie a lot because she doesn't come along on this trip. And when she wants to come, he doesn't let her because he doesn't want her knowing any of the details of what's going on here.
Yeah.
And but that scene and his reaction to is what you think a big strong man's react to. I can't listen to this. I can't hear this right now.
It's good.
Sorry. I have to I have something to do. I have a task to do. Thank God he has it, because I just don't know what to say. That's such a good movie. In the Valley of Ella, see that,
yep.
Do it.
Yeah,
it's not a pleasant film at all. It's such strong writing and such strong filmmaking, and and there's nothing about it. Haggis isn't he's a really, really sharp writer, but he isn't as a filmmaker, he isn't some flashy style over substance guy at all. At the same time, he gets mood and he gets atmosphere and he gets the most out of his casts and just about everything he does. And it's a really, really strong movie. So In the Valley of Ella, compared to Courage Under Fire, which is very similar to, the wars are different, the times are different, the things that happen to us are different. It's just I highly recommend it.
Yep. Let's move on to Taking Chance.
Ooh, I just watched that today.
Yeah. Taking Chance, Kevin Bacon as a military escort officer. He is there to escort the victims of war, soldiers, to escort them back home.
Well, he's that's not what he does. He's an officer, so he's not. Yeah, he is not an escort. He volunteers to be an escort for a lot of different things. There's a lot of things going on with Kevin Bacon's character. He's a Desert Storm veteran who didn't re-up to go to either of these new wars because he's got this young family that he wants to be around for, basically. And we get to know them, not a lot, because this is a travel log of a film, but we get to know them enough to understand where he's coming from there. There's a great scene where Gordon Clapp, who is the pilot on one of the planes he travels on, just a commercial pilot, not a military pilot, but a Vietnam veteran, he's like, well, he goes, so were you over there? He's like, no. He goes, well, you probably got plenty of action during Desert Storm, didn't you? And he's like, Bacon's like, not really. And Clapp's like, yeah, I miss it sometimes, It's really awkward, great conversation. But he volunteers because this kid, he doesn't know him, but he's from his hometown where he grew up. And he kind of sees that, and he just feels a connection to this person that he doesn't even know. And he kind of feels the responsibility of him being an officer on the home front during two wars that are ongoing in the U.S. military. And he's able to do that by choice because he has served his tour of duty. And that's it. This is a war movie. This is a home front war movie that you can watch with your parents. This is it's serious, but it's a family movie. This was also made for HBO.
Yeah.
It's the best probably Memorial Day movie maybe that we have on this list, because it's very, very reverent to the dead. It's about how they're treated. I had no idea any of the details of that. The film very nicely, bravo to the director of this, shows the details of how these bodies are taken care of en route without having Johnny explain everything to us every step of the way. It's a very, very subtle movie that way. A lot of silence and a lot of just letting the emotion and the responsibility of the thing sit. He refuses to take his jacket. And everybody in it is nice except one guy. There's a guy who's running the metal detector at the first airport he goes through, wants him to send his stuff through, and he's like, I can't send my bag through. And he's like, well, you take off your jacket. He's like, he's on duty. I cannot take off your jacket. The guy's like, sir, this jacket has a lot of metal on it, and we really, and just the way he says that with the metals, you know what I mean? You're just like, dude, ew. And he's like, but it's weird because it, like these other movies we've talked about, particularly the Vietnam ones, where these guys are just bombarded with awful, awful stuff. Everyone in this movie, everyone who sits next to them, the guys who work at the airports, the people who live in the hometown, like everybody it is cool and super respectful. And I mean, I think that's how we are. And I think this is a time, Memorial Day, where we behave that way for good reason. So I believe we've evolved in that way. And yet still the loss of this kid and the circumstances of it, and his connection to somebody that he never knew when he was alive is very, very real. And, you know, there's one scene where it's like, okay, the taxi's over there, sir, to take you to your hotel. And he's like, you know, actually, if you could just get me a chair, I don't really want to leave him alone for the night.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy's like, well, I don't know if we're allowed to do that. He goes, well, I know it's late, but he says, I don't know if we're allowed to do that, but I'll check with my supervisor. And Bacon's, I know it's late, but if you could, I would really appreciate it. And there's a lot of those exchanges in it.
Yeah.
That's sad, but it's heartwarming too. And I would argue that it's a heartwarming movie, even though it's a quiet, contemplative one.
Yeah.
People come together to heal together, and they take what's happening very, very seriously. And I knew it was good because Taking Chance has a fantastic reputation these 13, 15 years since it came out.
Right.
So I knew I was in for something good, but it was very, very good. Modest film where Bacon is just fantastic.
Let's move on to Brothers. I mean, we're talking about how people come together to heal, and I'm like, well, Brothers, there's some coming together to heal.
Well, there is, though. There really is. And the great thing about Brothers is that there is coming together to heal.
Yeah.
And obviously there's something that happens in Brothers where that healing gets interrupted. And I won't even give a value judgment to what it is that happens, but it changes everything. Brothers it's great. I had no idea. This is another film where this was the film I watched instead of watching the Oscars this year. Joel and I boycotted the Oscars, and we had no idea what we were getting into when we did that. Yep. We had no idea the Oscars were going to be what they were, but moving on from that, the movie I watched, I've had it sitting on my shelf for ages, was Brothers. And Jake Gyllenhaal and Tobey Maguire play brothers in it. That's great.
There you go.
They should play brothers in something. Well, it turns out they did. And little did I know. Maguire plays a guy who's going off to war, and Gyllenhaal plays his younger, ne'er-do-well, sort of dirtbag little brother. And again, this is a spoiler alert, but same with Valiella. I don't know how we talk about this movie without at least spoiling this, but Tobey Maguire is listed as killed in action. And you go through the whole thing. Who plays the wife in that? Is it his wife? Is it
Natalie Portman?
Natalie Portman.
You're talking about
the film's packed to the rafters with really cool people. It's directed by Tim Sheridan, who made My Left Foot and In the Name of the Father. And this is not his kind of movie, but he's working, I think, pretty great here, actually. Everything falls apart. And what's weird is that in that, Chris Cooper, too, is fantastic in it. He plays their father who loves one son. And is it Chris Cooper?
No, Sam Shepard.
Oh, Sam Shepard. Even better.
Mm-hmm.
Chris plays a similar guy in a different movie. Sorry. We'll get to you, Chris. You're awesome. No,
Chris
but even
awesome.
better, Sam Shepard, right?
Yeah.
Shepard's fantastic in it. Who plays the father in Walk the Line?
Give me a second here.
I got to find out because it's the same father, basically.
Walk the Line. It was let's see. Robert Patrick.
I think that's right. That's who it is.
Yep, it's Robert Patrick.
Wow, that's great. Great role for Robert. Okay, so but basically it's not just I love my one son who did everything right. It's I don't like you, and it's not even I don't like you, my other son. It's I'm going to poke you about every damn thing. I'm going to start fights with you at every family gathering. You know what I mean? And he does it, and Patrick very much does this to Joaquin Phoenix in Walk the Line, where he just keeps digging at him until the fight happens, and then it's the other guy who explodes, and then passive aggressive dad just sort of goes, "Oh, what's your problem?" And that's really what goes on in Brothers, and it's really, really effective. I'm not sure why I was so affected by it, but there's just something about that family dynamic. The younger brother coming home and the little girls in the movie are so good. I think those little girls in that film give the best little like kid performances that I've seen in anything, because they're just kids throughout the whole movie. And then suddenly they're asked to sort of nail some really, really heavy drama towards the back end of this film. And my God, do they pull it off? In what is attitudes that I think are difficult for kids to understand. So the direction I think is awesome. The patience had to have been there to capture it on film, correct? Because the kind of resentment and the complex thing that one of these girls goes through is it's complicated psychologically, and it plays perfectly in the film. That's one of the things that sticks with me. But Gyllenhaal is able to make a new life with his family. He's able to basically he's adopted by them more than the other way around. But eventually he rises to the challenge of taking his brother's place. And that is a hard thing. That's riddled with guilt and weirdness and awkwardness. And it is a hard thing to portray on film. And I like the Brothers. There's histrionics to it. If you know My Left Foot and In the Name of the Father, I mean, those are A+ film. Those are really, really good movies. This isn't quite that, but it nails that level of emotional frenzy in a very effective way when it has to. And that's just not an easy thing to do, because this topic is, it could be easy, just the brother whatever falls in love with his, it's so much more than that, this movie. And I was very, very impressed with it, because the studio sold it like a scandalous love triangle, which I'm sure if Coming Home came out today, they'd sell that the same way. It's worthy of Coming Home's approach to that sort of idea, and I appreciated that about it. And it's very stylistically done. It's like really good looking film. Yeah. The whole paint the kitchen thing, and
right. And and in order to we talk about how this it obviously Jake Gyllenhaal, Tobey Maguire, Natalie Portman, but I mean, it's Sam Shepard, Mary Winningham. In order to pull off, to me, Natalie Portman, in order to pull off that this grieving, just wrecked woman who, this isn't what, it's not like she was like just oh, well, I'm going to move on to the brother or something like that. It takes it takes an actor of her quality to make sure that we get that nuance, we get that pain in everything that is happening, even as she can't stop the emotions from happening. As she's acting on them, she also, there's an acknowledgement of the pain and the of what it's I want to say costing her, but I'm not sure that's the right word, but what it's taking for her to move on. And then obviously
and he's not there for that reason. He needs to be someplace. This is his family. And he becomes the best version of himself, trying to take care of them afterwards. And that's extraordinary. When he shows up on parole at their door, and what does the little girl say? My mom doesn't like you, or something.
Something like that.
I don't remember, but kids just like, who are you? Are you Uncle whatever? My mom doesn't like
Doesn't
you.
like
She
you.
says you're
Yeah.
this and this, and finally somebody rushes to the door. Okay, hello, welcome, or whatever. So they have a long journey together, and it's there's depth to it that's amazing. That's a really, really good movie. That's a really good movie that was sold as a scandalous, and it's a shame because that's a good one, I think.
Yep. So let's talk about these last two films I have not seen.
And if it sounds weird when I talk about it, it's because, my God, when you see it, you'll understand why I'm talking myself around in circles on that one. That's a hard one to talk about without ruining all of it. And we didn't, because we're awesome.
That's why you listen to the movie show with Joel and Ryan. But these last two films I have not seen. But let's talk about thank you for your service and The Last Full Measure. But let's do Thank You for Your Service first.
Thank You for Your Service is based on a novel written by a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter. It takes an extremely harsh look at a bunch of soldiers coming back from Joel, I can't tell you if it's Iraq or Afghanistan for any of these movies. These later period movies are all...
Yeah, they keep... All of these say Iraq.
Okay, so it's Iraq. I mean, I just don't know. Okay, so this one's Iraq. So, thank you. Either way, it's tough. This movie's another one where it's like, wow, what do you... It's about these guys who come back from the war and they're just ill-equipped to do it. And Miles Teller stars in it, and even he is... And Haley Bennett plays his wife, and they're both really, really great, fantastic in this film. But this film has I think there's something about brothers where a good portion of it is about healing, like Joel said. He said it with a twinkle in his eye, which I think is appropriate. But that is what the whole middle section of that film is about. It is about moving on, and it's about the magic in these kids' eyes, and it's about the reconciliation between him and his sister-in-law, and about his putting aside these sort of childish games he's been playing. He's even him and his dad are getting along by the end of it. This movie just isn't that. We end in a place where we think that might be possible in this film. That spoils the ending, I suppose. But this really is the breakdown, and how these guys and all these films really demonstrate this very well, but none better than Thank You for Your Service. They have to go through it, and you just wish anything but that on them. It's hard to explain, but they have to go through it. Nobody's wise enough to just get the help they need right away. Everybody wants to try and use their own coping mechanisms that they've developed their whole lives psychologically to deal with these things. And they have success largely when they do it. And, so they think that that's enough until it isn't. And then you do all the things. You feel guilty. You try and rationalize it away. Things just get worse and worse and worse. And it's three different guys in this story and the movie does a really good job too of not having the Courage Under Fire has the one haunting incident. This movie has that, and the previous movie Brothers has that too, but it just doesn't make it that easy. The whole thing was a haunting incident. The whole thing was a series of compromises and problems, and there's a darkness to all of it. What we ask these guys to do. For what? The movie doesn't get into that, but I mean, that's me sitting here as somebody who didn't serve, couldn't probably, and just saying, for what? For what? In the case of Iraq, why did we do this to them? And to see it just played out the way it is. Thank you for your service. None of these especially these later period ones that really nail it. The pedigree behind this film is very, very high in terms of writing and research, and the commitment by the performers in it to a nuanced portrayal of what it is is stunning. Miles is one of the best, when given the right material, is one of the best actors of his generation, and he's very, very interested. And they all kind of are in getting this right.
Right.
And it's complex and complicated, and nobody feels like they're stampeding toward a happy ending or necessarily a necessarily tragic one. So it's ugly and messy and complicated, and I love that about it. It doesn't have that structure that was the big selling point of Brothers, but it does have the which I like about it, because I don't remember its plot the way I do for that movie, because because it's all a bunch of stuff that happens, like stuff that happens to all of us. These guys specific, that could have happened to them. But outstanding stuff. That's a really, really strong movie that I really, really like. That's one of the, in terms of really giving you the post, traumatic stress experience. It is the one that nails it, where that's its mission, is to put you in the shoes of people going through that, and all of the things that go along with it. That's this movie. This movie's that experience. It's an amazing accomplishment.
Wow. Let's take a trip back to Vietnam with our final film, and that's The Last Full Measure. This is another one of a man being honored for his actions on the battlefield.
It's a tricky movie.
Many years later.
It's a tricky movie. It's based on a real person who did this real stuff, and who was given the Air Force Cross for valor, which is a pretty big deal. It was a medic, a helicopter medic during Vietnam, who was treating people in the back of this helicopter that they were airlifting out of this absolute bloodbath of a battle that took place there. And the first guy that's sent up in that little cage that they put you in when you go up the winch to the helicopter is the company's medic. And without one, most of these guys are going to die. So he takes his place. He goes down on the winch and he starts treating people, and as a point of necessity, fights with them. And he saved a lot of lives that day. Everyone agrees with that. He was put up for the Medal of Honor, but he was only given the Air Force Cross. Now, it's still Air Force Cross is pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. But these soldiers, these older guys, played by a handful of just the best actors ever. It was hard to watch to a certain degree, because some of these guys, this movie's only 3 years old, and a bunch of these guys, as a matter of fact, all but one in one of the scenes have all left us recently. William Hurt, Christopher Plummer, John Savage, Samuel L. Jackson, Ed Harris. Those are the main players that play these soldiers after the fact. It's hard to know who breaks your heart more in the movie. It's really hard to pick one. Again, I watched this with my friend Jenny. We talked about her early in the show. Her and I watch a lot of movies together, and the only flaw this film has is that she said it's slightly Disney-fied, isn't it? And I said it is. I don't want you guys to take that the wrong way, because the violence in it is not dumbed down. The language in it is certainly not dumbed down. It's an adult movie. It's rated R. But it does, what they did when they told the story when they told the movie was they kept this guy's real story in place. But these other soldiers that they created, all of them are not real. They're all heavily fictionalized versions of the people who were there. And the reason they did that was because they have an agenda with each character. They want to tell a kind of story, a kind of Vietnam story, a Vietnam vet story and experience, both from the war and then their coping mechanisms after. And the only way to do that is to set aside the people in real life whose stories were like, thank you for your service, were messier, harder to fictionalize in a clean way. And that's a clever way to do the movie, because it carries us along in this fantastic way. they can do more with that because they're liberated from telling the biographies of all these real people. And all of the soldiers in this case were more than happy, and the states were more than happy to let that happen because they wanted the focus to be on this hero. And that's what they all had always wanted. It's why they spent 30, 40 years or whatever it was, 30 years, fighting for this guy to be given the Medal of Honor posthumously and have his medal upgraded because he deserved it, but because he meant something very specific to all of them. It's a wonderful film. Sebastian Stan, again in the Denzel Washington role from Courage Under Fire, plays a non-soldier in this case who's works for the Department of Defense and is given this case. We find out for rather nefarious reasons later in the film, in a little conspiracy that the film has. Conspiracy of one, I guess.
Right.
Conspiracy of Bradley Whitford. Spoiler alert for the last measure. That part of the story is so unimportant that I feel like I can just go ahead and waste it. Bradley's very entertaining in it, but it's and his character, despite doing some goofy things, is given some redemption in it. So that's all good. That's the Disneyfied thing we're talking about. The film earns the company's standing ovation at the end, and it earns yours. This really was a story of a real guy, and I love it for that reason. And I love Amy Madigan plays Peter Fonda's wife. Peter Fonda, I didn't even name him. He's gone too.
Mm-hmm.
And Amy Madigan and Ed Harris are a real life couple, and they're in a lot of movies together. So I'm always excited to see them, even if they don't share any scenes together, which they don't. Harris is outstanding. Harris had his letter that he was supposed to deliver to his boyfriend. He's a stranger to this guy, but he was given on the battlefield his letter, and he didn't deliver it because he couldn't. Again, that's not something that happened in this guy's real life, but it is something that happened many, 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 many times in Vietnam. So they're getting to tell that story, and that story is amazing. Sam Shepard's story is amazing. How he got the coordinates wrong and basically blames himself for the entire incident. Dale Dye plays the commanding officer that day at headquarters who kind of boofed the whole thing up and made them walk into an ambush. Perhaps deliberately, we're not sure. William Hurt played the guy who, when they asked for volunteers in the helicopter, bit his tongue hard and was terrified to go down there when his friend and comrade was more than willing to do it. And has spent his whole life grappling with that. There's a scene, it's a little heavy-handed, but there's a scene with Sebastian and William Hurt at the Vietnam Memorial in front of his friend's name, where he finally breaks down over the guilt of that. And Sebastian Stan's character is starting to get it. And he sort of confronts him and drags this out of him. And Hurt is such a strong actor, and Stan just quietly says to him when he breaks down, sort of falls to his knees, and he sort of helps him up and says, let me carry it for a while. I have to say, as somebody who doesn't have that experience out of life, that's the fantasy for a non-soldier, to help, to be there somehow for somebody. And I identified with him, so I found that tremendously moving. John Savage never left Vietnam. He created a garden out of the place where that battle happened, and people make pilgrimages to spend time there. It's basically a butterfly garden.
Wow.
And John Savage, because he was the young kid in Deer Hunter, now that you see him as an old player, like, he brings a little of that Vietnam baggage with him. So it is a little Disneyfied. That was a really clever term, but it's worth it. It's worth it because these are all paths that you can travel freely when you're able to fictionalize a little bit, and yet you come out the other end tremendously moved and honoring a true hero. And I don't think you can find a better Memorial Day movie than Last Full Measure. It should be out there on streaming services. I would think it's fairly recent. It's got a couple Marvel Extended Universe people in it. I mean, what else do you need to sell today, right?
It is available on FX Now if you are a subscriber to FX Now.
That's too bad. I was hoping something a little less Sons of Anarchy-ish. You know, Hollywood, Vietnam's fun because Hollywood did right by that.
Sure.
We didn't. I think as a country, I think those guys really did suffer a lot of alienation stuff. I got to the first Vietnam memorial ever in America was not in Washington, D.C. It was in Missoula, Montana. And when I spent time out in Missoula, there were a lot of guys, several of them homeless, but a lot of just Vietnam veterans who flocked there for that reason. And I got to know a bunch of them, at least a little, which was not something that I was expecting to happen. My very first day in Missoula, there was a vet, and he came up to me and said, "Hey man, can I have like $3.50 so I can buy a slice of pizza for my dog?" How do you say no to that?
Yeah.
I mean, I thought he, no offense to old guys living on the street in Minneapolis, but I thought he was full of shit, because that's just the kind they would say the craziest things to you around here, and you'd be like, okay, whatever. If I ever had money, I would give it away. And so I gave this guy $5 and went in to get whatever I was getting. And when I came out, sure enough, there's this black mutt-looking dog with a red bandana on, eating a slice of pizza off a little cardboard pizza thing, and he's hanging out there, and his friends are all hanging out, and they got motorcycles and stuff. So that's a crazy long anecdote. I'm sorry about that. But what I was saying about Vietnam and Hollywood, Platoon, and even Deer Hunter, which I have all kinds of problems with, they've come up on the show before. They're trying to give you a horror and heroism and to demonstrate the pain to you of what that was, what Vietnam was, and I'll go back to that question I asked a little while ago. For what was Vietnam for? Vietnam was a war of ideology and economics.
Mm-hmm.
When we say the people of Vietnam were fighting for our freedom, I feel that's disingenuous. I can't bring myself to say that. I don't mean to get all political on a movie show. That is a sort of a political thing to say. I recognize that, but let's look at what Vietnam was. What were we doing there? Why were we there? And worse, because I think there are real ideological reasons for being there, and ideology is a reason we fight wars throughout history. That I can sort of relate to and at least understand, even if I don't agree with it. But the economics that kept Vietnam going, all the companies back home that were built by building all those things that were sent over someplace where we had no real vested interest in what was happening, that were exploded, that had very, very high profit margins and very, very big government contracts. And those were the people, they were the last people who didn't want to see the Vietnam War end. And all kinds of awful things happened in our history because of that. And I can't stress enough that doesn't take anything away whatsoever on this Memorial Day weekend from the people who fought and died there.
Right.
For that, for each other, for their own ideals, for their own sense of bravery, but really for each other more than anything. Because I really don't think, and I don't think you should think, that it was for our freedom. I think it's hard to learn the lessons of things that we do wrong as a nation or even as individuals if that level of rationalization is what you're willing to put up with just to be polite to these soldiers. I don't think there's many Vietnam soldiers who thought they were over there fighting for your freedom either.
Right.
I don't think so. I don't know what the kids today think, but I hate to say it, they weren't fighting for your freedom either. They weren't. Afghanistan is a really difficult war to justify. Iraq is an illegal war that people should go to prison for starting. That war was started on a lie, both of which were meant to make people rich. That was the main thing that they did. That was the main economic benefit, was pro-business, pro-privatization of the military. That's what happened over there. And if these people died, those kids died fighting for a cause to bring democracy to the Middle East. Yeah, that's what they were trying to do. Did it happen in Afghanistan? No. effing didn't happen in Afghanistan, period. We just saw that. Afghanistan's worse off than when we got there.
Right.
Because our priorities were to keep blowing stuff up, to keep building things, to be giving out government contracts to people who make campaign donations or who have places on the board of these giant companies who build all these massive infrastructure projects. At a time when we really need infrastructure projects done here in America, we were doing them over there. And most of that stuff got blown up again anyway. Iraq was the illegal war. I just said it. I'm on the record now. But Iraq is more complicated because Iraq's situation on the ground when we went there was more complicated. There's a shot that we actually did some good in Iraq. And I hate it, but I at least give me credit for being nuanced enough to say Iraq may be better than where we found it. That's something.
Yeah.
But it wasn't for our freedom.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't fight for our freedom.
Right.
They didn't die for our freedom. And that's shameful. And we should feel that shame. That's my Memorial Day statement. That's sort of a dark one. I just believed when I was a kid because I was raised, because I'm a naive kid who doesn't have a call to service within me. So I'm to take everything I have with a grain of salt.
We grew up at a time where it was not, in fact, being the children of people who grew up during the Vietnam era, there was a plea, like, don't, you aren't, I will not let you enlist. And
to get back to the show, Joel, the art, the movies, the stories taught us the lesson of what Vietnam was and why we shouldn't re-engage in that. And I said I would talk about Desert Storm for a second. Desert Storm demonstrated that we'd learned the lesson. I remember all my super liberal friends. I'm only mostly super liberal. I guess now guys can tell from this little speechifying. Yep. But at the time I thought they were silly. They were protesting that war. I got into a big fight with your mother-in-law over this, in fact, because I was cynical about it. I was like, I don't know. They're invading another country. You can't just hang back and see what happens. You got to do something about that. And she's like, well, they're only doing it for the oil. And I go, well, either way, you do something about it. I get that. And 79 lives were lost in that war. Desert Storm cost less than the Hubble Space Telescope cost. We got in, we stopped the invasion, we protected our oil interests. Okay, you were right about that. I'm not arguing with that. I maybe did a little at the time, but I'm not now. That's clearly a big part of it, if not the biggest part of it. But we got in, we got out. We showed that we're not going to be some weird occupying army spending gajillions of dollars just to get old white people rich while young, much more diverse people die, So I really do honor those people, and I honor the stories about them so much, and I'm so full of shame when I think about the people that are in the ground for reasons that we didn't ask the right questions and didn't do the right things. And then even when we had the power, it didn't stop some of the horrors from happening. It frustrates me and makes me sad. And when I just always want to keep that in mind before you decide to go send somebody to die for your freedom, and make sure that's what they're doing. Vet it out a little bit better,
Yep.
And that doesn't take anything away from those who laid down their lives for us, fought under our flag. You know what I mean? Because we asked them to, and most importantly, for the people that they fought alongside.
You're right. But, whatever the reasons an individual might have to enlist, and we are a volunteer army. Yeah. That was part of what made Vietnam unique too, is that there were a lot of people that
were drafted,
whether they wanted to be a part of it or not. But none of that should take away from the fact that there were some who in the name of this country, gave their lives, and that is worthy of our respect and our honor.
No question.
And we should be doing whatever the hell we can to make sure that we don't have to continue to have more and more and more names that we need to honor and remember.
And we need to take some of that massive military budget and support these people better when they come home. It's correct. Also the shame of our nation that we really don't do that anywhere near to the degree that we should.
Mm-hmm. All right. So not the most enthusiastic, gregarious ending to the show, but it's a Memorial Day show. And again, like Ryan as Ryan mentioned at the beginning of the show, some of these movies are a little bit more in a Veterans Day sort of vein, where we are looking at men, in this case, men who have returned home from war and the effects of war. But there is also taking chances and some of these movies where we are honoring the fallen, honoring those who gave of their lives, and all of these movies I think are worth your time if you're looking for a way to get into that mindset of remembering and honoring. You could do worse than spending a couple hours with any of these films. So we hope that we piqued your interest.
Mine.
Except the park is mine. Go ahead and we threw
that one. Sorry.
Yep.
I don't mean to make a joke on your interview.
No.
But living these stories, that's why we do the show. That's what the movies give us. You get to live life in these people's shoes. It's the actors have to do that exercise, and then they pay it back through the screen to us, where we have to again do that same exercise. There's no, you know what I mean? There's no shared responsibility on the viewer's part, like it is when you're reading a book even, but you get to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. And all of these stories, even The Park Is Mine, actually deliver on that to a large degree in a way that, like I said, we're never going to experience that. Not trauma like that, not like that. And I think that the trauma part of it, the horror of war part of it, is something we should continue to experience in as sort of authentic way as we can through our stories. So that's what the show is about.
Yeah. All right. So please feel free to reach out to us at the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan page on Facebook, at Ask Joel and Ryan on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And you can email us, askjoelandryan@gmail.com. And of course, if you're watching the video feed of this on YouTube, you should feel free to like and subscribe and send us a message there if you want. All right. So that is going to do it for this
Unless
week.
You're really mad at us for the end of the show here, then just send those messages elsewhere. That'd be cool.
Indeed. Bye, everyone.
Bye, you guys. Happy Memorial Day.
Thank you for listening to The Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. Remember, all views and opinions represented in this podcast are personal and belong solely to the speaker and do not represent those people, institutions, or organizations that the speaker may or may not be associated with, unless explicitly stated. None of these views and opinions were intended to malign or deceive. And now, here's the producers, circa 1982, to play us out.